Hi everyone, it is me again. So for this video, I'm going to just briefly give you a little background regarding the two documents you're reading for today. So quickly, you're reading a document by Alexander Manly. It's an editorial. So I'm going to give you background on that. And then also a letter that was written to the Atlantic Constitution, which was a paper in the 1800s by Rebecca Latimer Felton. So to give a little background, so Felton was it's difficult to call her an actual feminist, but she was a woman living in the late 1800s that fought for more education for women and greater powers for women, but not just women, very specifically white women. And in this document, you're going to read about this quote that was taken out of context about lynch 100 a day, I believe. And so I want to give you a little background on how that quote got taken out of context. So initially, Felton gave a speech that discussed how she believed that white males were not properly protecting white women in the Reconstruction era, in the era following the Civil Rights movement, or I'm sorry, the Civil War. Sorry about that. So in the era following the Civil War, there's quite a bit of racial violence, which you learned about in the Crash Course video. And there was some racial violence against white women, but a lot of racial violence that was claimed to be against white women was led to lynchings, which was a way to that's not the right word, a way to kind of put fear back into African Americans' minds in a way that would disenfranchise them. So get them to not vote anymore or to act politically in any way. And Rebecca Felton was kind of using this to her advantage by shaming white men, claiming that they weren't masculine enough to protect white women, and allowing black men and hurt white women, right? And so she says in her speech, if you must lynch I think it's 1,000 a week or 100, lynch 1,000 a week, do that if that's the only way that you know how to protect white women. And this was in turn, although it was she was meaning it to actually shame white men and to kind of claim that they weren't masculine enough to protect white women, it was taken out of context and used as a kind of reasoning to promote lynchings of black men. Okay, and so Manly is responding to that initial speech given by Felton that was taken out of context. And he does it in a very interesting and extremely controversial way, as I hope you'll pick up on in reading the editorial. He's claiming things that go against these, like the way that race is being reconstructed after the Civil War, right? So he's saying there's something called the myth of the black male rapist, right? And it's this idea that after the Civil War, that was constructed after the Civil War, that claimed that black men were these like very animalistic beings that were very much, white women were very vulnerable to, that as they could be victims, right? And this was completely false, but it was used to reassert white supremacy in the post-Civil War era, right? Even in the post-Reconstruction era, in the era between like 1880s to the 1900s and even into the 20th century. And he's going against this in a number of ways, which I hope you pick up on. Well, ultimately, I want to give you kind of what happens after. So Manly publishes this article in I want to make sure I say this right, the Wilmington Daily Record, which was a black newspaper of the time based out of Wilmington, North Carolina. Well, it was such a controversial piece that it actually led to a race riot, often called the Wilmington Race Riot of 1898. So just 48 hours after this was published, the race riot broke out. And they started, and I have some notes on it, they started by actually 500 white men marched to the Daily Record, which was the newspaper, headquarters, broke windows, and set the building on fire. Manley was able to escape prior to being injured, but I do know that there was, I think, at least 14 deaths. Yes, at least 14 African Americans were killed during the race riot. And this really led to Wilmington pushing out many of their African American residents and also reissuing laws that put restrictions on African Americans, including the grandfather clause, which stated that you only had the right to vote if your grandfather could vote, meaning any African American living in Wilmington who had a grandfather that was enslaved ultimately could not vote because their grandfather did not have the right to vote. This is part of a slew of different ways that white cities and states, whites in different cities and states try to reassert political power by removing the vote from African Americans. Other ways they did this was poll taxes, and they would test, they would give literacy tests in order to register to vote that were quite complicated and oftentimes would fail. So that's the little bit of background on the two documents you're going to read for this week. I think they're very controversial and interesting, so I hope you enjoy them. They're short. I wanted to keep the readings very short for this week because I know it's such a short week, so I hope you enjoyed them. And please use the Manley editorial to answer the sourcing questions. And most of the questions in the assessment are about the Felton document, but there is a couple that refer back to the Manley. So pay attention for that. All right. Good luck. I hope you enjoy. Bye.